Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session on smart mobility station hubs and last mile networks. I'm Michael Ledgett. I'm a partner in the Toronto office of Dentons Canada, and I'm the moderator for the session. And Dentons is the sponsor. Dentons is a global law firm with 188 locations in 77 countries worldwide. Dentons Canada operates in 6 offices in major centers in British Columbia, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. Our panel members for this session are Rick Meade, who's the Senior Executive Officer, Program Management at LA Metro. He'll be speaking to us from Los Angeles. It's Meghan Wong, who's the Vice President, Development, Heavy Rail, New Stations from Metrolinx in Toronto. And Ian Horseman Sewell, who's the CEO, First Class Partnerships, who will be speaking to us from London. Our topic is, you've seen the topic as it's shown in the materials for the conference. The topic is really an amalgam of two ideas. One is the notion of rail stations as community hubs, and the other amalgam is the notion of last mile networks connecting to those community hubs. So we're talking about commuter rail, we're talking about LRT, we're talking about subway stations as hubs for transit-oriented communities. We're talking about them as platforms for commercial and residential development, in addition for as a station for rail operations. Last mile networks is really something that is a work in progress, I think, around the world. The notion of different modes of moving from residences to rail stations, looking forward into the future to fully electric fleets of buses and shuttles, and off into the future more into autonomous vehicles and how they all connect with the whole notion of transit hubs as part of a transit-oriented communities. So we'll start with each of Meghan and Ian and Rick providing a few remarks, and then after we'll turn to Q&A. And I'm going to ask each of Meghan and Ian and Rick. I know that the bios for each of us are in the conference materials, but I would ask you just to say a few words about your organization and then launch into the topic. So Meghan, you're on.
Great, thanks very much, Michael, and good afternoon, everyone. Really happy to be here discussing smart mobility station hubs and last mile networks. I think we could probably spend days speaking about this, but we'll do our best to cover it off in 45 minutes. So just a brief overview about Metrolinx. As Michael mentioned, the province of Ontario created Metrolinx as a regional transportation agency in 2006. So we were tasked at that time with working with all levels of government, the private sector, and other stakeholders to create an integrated transportation system that would support a higher quality of life, a prosperous economy, and a healthier environment. Over the last decade or more, Metrolinx has delivered on this mandate to expand transit throughout the region. Since the release of the region's first ever transportation plan in 2008, the Big Move, Metrolinx set out a common vision for the region and a guide of how to transform transportation. Working towards that vision, we increased the number of weekly train trips offered by GO Transit, which is our heavy rail train line, by 500%, adding more than 13 million passenger trips per year. We renovated 29 stations and added 22,000 parking spaces to our system, which is strongly predicated on park and ride in some of our more rural or suburban areas. The adoption of our Presto card has tripled in the last 5 years, and our Up Express airport service provides 4.1 million passenger trips per year. Today, the expansion of transit in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area is one of the largest concentrations of infrastructure projects in North America. By 2041, we're projecting more than 10 million people to live in our region, comparable to Paris or London. And our vision truly is getting you there better, faster, and easier. Just a quick overview of our network and really what I'm speaking about. We have kind of 3 different types of service. So we have our GO, bus, and heavy rail network. We have a light rail transit network in development, and we have new planned subway projects. We have 68 heavy rail GO stations across 7 rail corridors. We have 14 new business cases for new stations we could add to that network. And we're initiating work on a GO expansion program, which is more all-day service in both directions on 5 of our lines, trains every 15 minutes, creating rapid transit, more accessible stations, and trains running faster with less operating cost per kilometer. We have 3 around 20-kilometer light rail transit lines in construction in our region, and a new LRT and 3 new subway lines planned as well. We have over 20 GO bus routes, and prior to the pandemic, our overall GO transit ridership was around 330,000 people per day. With the amount of growth projected for the region, it is essential that we have a transit service and system that keeps pace with that. And some important initiatives we're working on towards that are smart mobility and first and last mile, which really speaks to what we're talking about today, using alternative modes of transportation to reduce or replace gas-powered vehicles, and looking at different forms and partnerships to achieve ride sharing, car sharing, public transportation, and other modes like walking and biking. And the need for this has really arisen out of really the Greater Toronto area and really throughout North America, the increasing effects of traffic congestion, pollution, fatalities, wasted time. This is really the focus of the work that Metrolinx is trying to do. So a really key component, and I think why I've been asked to join today, is to speak about our Transit-Oriented Communities program. We refer to this acronym as TOC, sometimes referred to as Transit-Oriented Development. And what we're really looking at are connections to communities for transit to be supported with higher dense mixed-use development, and truly working with third parties, whether they be developers, landowners, municipalities, or other levels of government, to deliver this infrastructure. And projects such as the new Woodbine GO station plan for Toronto, or the upgraded and rebuilt Mimico GO station, also in the city of Toronto, are really great examples of this. Our program is really seeking a fair exchange of value where we can generate revenue and create investment opportunities. This is for development that increases transit ridership by locating more people and jobs near stations, and improving the customer experience by enhancing station areas and making transit more attractive to the market. I spoke a little bit about Mimico. Mimico is a really great city building opportunity to create better places to live, work, and play. And it was really a transaction that maximized the value and development potential of some of the air rights that the province owned above the station. Woodbine is a really great opportunity to add a brand new GO station to one of our corridors, and a developer-led project that Metrolinx is working in partnership with to deliver new transit and rail infrastructure. This program is really strengthened at this time by the support we have from the provincial government and the intersection of a number of critical factors. Primarily the maturity of the development industry in Toronto, which is very strong even at this time, the consolidation of financial capital in our market, the scale of infrastructure investment, like I mentioned, and very strong commercial and residential markets in general in the Greater Toronto Hamilton area. We're also adopting a really strong willingness to approach projects more entrepreneurial and focus on strengthening our commercial acumen while maintaining this balance of public accountability and transparency. And I think this is a really important pivotal moment for the agency in being able to work as a partner in this sector. These projects obviously come with challenges. They're significantly more complex from an infrastructure and delivery perspective. We're balancing live rail operations and complex transit infrastructure with private development, community master planning. It's definitely complex, but it results in greater benefits, we think, for all the parties and the future of our communities. And although we're in a current pandemic, which I'm sure is top of mind for everyone, that will have some impacts, we feel really positive about the outlook for the future, and Toronto being still a very central place in the province and the country for people to center their business and economic activity around. And I'd like to just close off by saying that the local community is really what's most important to Metrolinx. We serve many municipalities and regions, crossing municipal borders and connecting urban and rural communities, each with a unique character and identity. So with this, it's extremely important that we respect the local and built environment and community. Each project is unique, each station is unique, and it's important that we maintain that and respect that context and use that to create better value, including smart mobility and reducing congestion and improving the quality of life. So I think with that, I'll hand things over to Ian and looking forward to some questions at the end. Thanks very much.
You're on, Ian.
Thank you, Michael, and good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Just a quick intro, mine will be very quick. Yeah, FCP, my company, is involved as things stand from San Francisco in the west to New South Wales in the east, helping specifically organizations that are interested in the development and investment in railways and all related forms of rail travel. So that's what we do. We combine operational experience with kind of an appetite to innovate and to bring new money to sometimes intractable problems that transit authorities or other stakeholders are seeking to solve. That's what we do for a living, and we're proud to be doing that in Toronto, where many of you are at the moment. We work in these multiple geographies, and I thought rather than dwelling on any one place, I'd see if I could pull out 5 or 6 themes that I'm seeing that I think are relevant to this whole smart mobility last mile agenda. The first is kind of the understanding of how different it can be when we're trying to do things in a greenfield site versus a brownfield site. And that may sound like a really dull point, but particularly in the context of sustainability, we're seeing massive differences in some of the amazing schemes that are delivered in greenfield sites versus those that are dealing with much more complex sometimes and, as I say, intractable challenges in brownfield locations. And perhaps we see that most often in our work in the UK, where there are, old, often decaying terminal stations that take on immense challenges and sometimes really succeed in a place like King's Cross and St Pancras in London, and in other areas where it's taking longer to deliver. So that was my first point. The second point, I think, is we have to not forget the small schemes, because there can be just as, if not even more, socioeconomic dividend from some of the smaller schemes. And if I look at the UK as an example, and we just think about stations, it's probably less than 1% of the UK's 2,500 railway stations that merit the kind of large-scale King's Cross Central treatment. That doesn't mean we should leave out the 99% of other stations, and we're seeing opportunities to deliver really significant socioeconomic benefit by changing the customer experience in some of these places for those people that are seeking to use public transit. And that brings me on to my third point, which is, I think as a community, whether financiers or designers or consultants like FCP, we need to be doing more to improve the customer experience, particularly experience of interchange. And one of the things we're heavily involved in is trying to make transit, and particularly intertrains at hubs, something that's much more achievable and comfortable and attractive, frankly, to the whole population, not just those people who are both able-bodied and able-minded. And so I think that's a really, really big area. And one of the things we have to remember in the coming years, as we see national governments banning the internal combustion engine, is more and more people will be trying transit for the first time. And we need to make sure that that experience is one they want to repeat, and not one that they immediately find to be uncomfortable or unattractive. My next point is about leadership and sponsorship. These are massively, massively important features of a successful transit-oriented scheme. And I could reel off lots of examples. The one that comes to mind immediately is if something like Manchester in England, where people like Sir Howard Bernstein, some people have heard him, really as political leaders rolled up their sleeves and got people involved. got anchor tenants in new developments that made massive difference to the view of places as a place to work or base your business. And on the back of that, I think there's a very significant and specific challenge about promoting the last mile opportunity. So I think some of our stations are seen as places where your journey ends. And we often, even though we've laid on the facilities, we don't do a good enough job of promoting the fact that you can keep going door to door, and it doesn't just have to be about station to station. My final 2 points are really to echo a couple of things that Meghan said. The first is we always need to expect unintended consequences of some of the things we do. We've recently been working on something where the commercial development potential in a particular station was specifically ruled out in many ways by some very clever technology that was introduced in terms of revenue protection, so gate lines and so forth. It ruled out whole areas of a very significant station for commercial development. It was never intended that way, but it was an unintended consequence of a well-meant development. And my final point before I hand over is, I guess if Britain's former Prime Minister from Tony Blair were making it, is that all of this really comes down to three things: stakeholders, stakeholders, and stakeholders. All of the most successful schemes that we've been involved with have seen root and branch stakeholder engagement from all sides of the community, and it makes such a big difference. And there's a kind of little beacon scheme that I would urge you all to look at in the northwest of England, at a station called Earlham, where, you know, a decaying location, a decaying station, an innovative entrepreneur with private money to spend all came together with a really comprehensive stakeholder engagement scheme, and the location has been transformed. That's a beacon scheme, and evidence is my point about stakeholders. That's enough from me. Really interested in the subject. Look forward to hearing what Rick has to say.
Thanks, Ian. We had hoped that Rick would join us where we were starting our panel. He hasn't been able to connect us yet, so we'll.
Actually, I'm here. I'm here.
You're here.
I'm
That's
here.
marvelous. We just can't see you.
Yeah, I was having. Oh, you can't
There
see me.
are.
Oh, let me.
There he is.
There you are.
You have me? Okay.
So
Yeah, I was
welcome.
I was having some technical difficulties in getting on board, so I apologize.
So I don't know whether you heard all of the intro, but we're doing our introductory comments, and Meghan and Ian have done their thing. So you're up if you talk a bit about LA Metro and then launch into the topic.
Sure.
So Rick Meade.
Be glad to. Thank you. So let me provide a little bit of background as to what we're faced with here in LA. LA is there's about 88 separate cities, about 5,000 square miles of ground to cover from a transit perspective. It is, as I understand it, the largest county in the United States, in the nation. So if you believe what the internet says and the publicity folks for LA Metro, then we're pretty good size. There's about 10 million people that we serve, that our transit system serves. And it looks like what the predictions are, at least pre-COVID, it looked like the predictions is we were going to grow by about 2 million people over the next 20 to 30 years. So we've got a pretty decent transit undertaking to move forward with. So the way that we're funding this is we've got a Measure M. It's a half-cent sales tax. And it is really meant to double from a capital project perspective, it's meant to double the size of our system over the next 40 years or so. And so kind of zeroing in a little bit, we're looking ahead where we are, rather than focusing on transit-oriented development, or what we call TOD, we are focusing more on transit-oriented communities. So to be more encompassing from a transit perspective, to look at the communities themselves, you know, as an overall potential for, you know, sort of enriching the lives of people from a transit perspective and creating access. And you know, this is for living, for work, for entertainment, for access to education, you know, all of the above, all the things that we as a transit community are interested in producing. So the way that we're going about this in LA, just from a very high level perspective, is we've developed fairly recently some policies and goals for these transit-oriented communities, and I'm going to read down through a couple of bullets here to give you some perspective on you know how we're going about to accomplishing these transit-oriented communities. So our aim is to the policy's aim is to increase ridership and to increase ridership choices. And so, you know, give people the ability to access the system, to stabilize and to enhance the communities around the transit system. Enhance the communities around the transit system. To engage organizations, private and public, and jurisdictions, so that the community is able to engage, and then to distribute transit benefits to all that are involved in the community. Last one is to capture the value that is created by a transit system, to capture the value that transit systems offer and the access offers. So we formed teams at Metro to focus on these individual and specific items. And you know, the first item that the first team that is the focus of the first team is the first last mile. So they are developing access systems with the community, with agencies, with the public sector, public and private sector, to develop access, sidewalks, bikeways, walkways, etc. The second team is a joint development team that focuses on projects that properties that are owned by Metro. So what can we do with the properties that are owned by Metro to help facilitate development in a transit-oriented capacity? And then the last team is a strategic initiatives team that focuses on many things from a strategic perspective to push these transit-oriented communities forward. Grant funding, for instance, coordinating with adjacent property owners that are interested in developing housing, for instance. We're also very interested in providing low-income housing as a percentage of any development that we produce from a transit agency perspective. And then we are also leading a redevelopment of the surrounding community. So if there is an area that has good potential for redevelopment and enhancing the amenities of the community, then Metro is involved in that. So I'll stop there, and you know, that's sort of an overview of what we're doing relative to the transit-oriented communities. I also should say that part of this is the design of stations, kind of bringing this back around to our, you know, one of our primary topics for this session is that our design for stations really, we are encouraging the design of stations so that it provides better access to the system. All right, so I'll stop there and see if there are any additional questions or comments.
There's certainly a confluence of themes there. I was listening to Rick and then thinking about Meghan and transit-oriented communities in Toronto, and it's almost like the themes are coexistent. And then you look at the different themes that Ian pointed to, and they all configure in transit-oriented communities that that both Meghan and Rick are talking about. I want to pick up on a comment of the 6 points that Ian mentioned. His first was greenfield, brownfield, and just thinking about stations. There's 2 or 3 or 4 different themes here that all go to the decision making around what you do with stations, and one of those is the development of the station. Is it a greenfield or a brownfield project? Is it entirely public, or is it some sort of public-private engagement? Is it large or is it small? I must say I came to the topic thinking we were all talking about large. And then finally, it's now and in the future. So you develop these large infrastructure projects with the circumstances you have right now, but they're really 50-year projects. And you've got to look at what mobility is going to look like over the next 10, 15, 20, 50 years. So taking all of those themes, and I'm going to come back to Meghan here, when you're looking at new projects, hub projects, and these are unique projects, these aren't just your everyday station. When you're picking projects that you want to think about and work on, looking at those different criteria, what are the ones that are more important and less important?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I like what Ian said about 1% being those really large scale hub projects, but each one of them having a role in the community and being important. And I think for us, choosing those large scale projects is really the confluence of a number of really important factors. So first being the transit component. As a transit agency, is this the right location for ridership? It's likely an interchange, or it has other connections, or connections able to be enhanced. And is the infrastructure there, or is the framework in place to deliver that, to really create that actual transportation side of the hub? I think the other piece of it is the surrounding context and the ability for development and redevelopment. And Rick might have mentioned, but I made the same or a similar point about TOC versus TOD and the community being really important. And so looking at the adjacent and actual property fabric around where that hub would be and where it would be located, is there an opportunity to actually create something bigger that can be more of a community hub than just a transit hub? And is that something that can be supported with the rest of the community? Is it a built community? Is it a transitional one? And having the support of multiple levels of government, I think is really important in those as well, because for Metrolinx, we're not actually the planning authority for planning and local development approval at a municipal level. And so coordinating these different pieces to make sure that the hub is set up for success, I think those two sides of it are really the most important from my perspective.
So Ian, just focusing on the UK experience is of course quite different from the experience both in Toronto and LA. You think about Crossrail and what it's doing. My understanding the notion of community-oriented transit is something that is inherent in Crossrail. Is that what are you seeing happening looking at those different criteria in the UK?
I think we're doing a better job than we were about thinking about the long term with these schemes, perhaps because we have to, from a benefits case point of view. the examples of the big schemes in the UK, Crossrail, HS2, some of the big station transformations, the terminal station transformations like King's Cross, like the work going on at Euston and in central Birmingham as well, do encourage me that people are thinking about the, people call it transit-oriented communities. I think they need to, as you said, remember it's community-oriented transit that we're looking for. And I think we're doing a better job, but there's still plenty of distance to travel to get it right. And there's a lot of education required as well. So I sometimes think that these big schemes tend to focus down on what can happen within a mile from them. And actually the impact of somewhere like St Pancras is extraordinary, both in terms of its reach, but also in terms of the impact on interchange and behaviors. So, you get some of these things right, and you shift huge flows of traffic and footfall that you perhaps wouldn't otherwise have thought about. I think the other thing that I'm seeing more and more of is that there is a greater and growing acceptance that we need to find new ways to get private capital into some of these schemes, because we've had our issues with things like PFI, and we've had other not in the transit sector, but across the board. And I think we're looking to find new ways into that, into private capital. There's, for instance, a really new bond exchange been launched in London, which is specifically targeted and providing bond finance to some of these schemes rather than just the traditional models that we've seen in some of the P3 schemes. And that just gives me hope that long-term, potentially ultra-high net worth or family office money that may be looking to invest for as much as 150 years will come on board some of these schemes and will understand that their benefit is measured in 50 years or more, and that that's okay for them. And particularly perhaps at a time when other forms of investment are paying such low returns.
So Rick, in your world, looking at these different criteria, the greenfield and brownfield and large and small, and particularly in public and private, what are the criteria that come highest on your priority list when you're thinking about developing or renewing stations? Rick here.
Sorry about that.
There you go.
So I'm 100% on board that we need to find a way to bring private investment or private equity into these projects. And because there's so much private equity out there that there's so much potential out there, and these projects are so expensive that to depend on the public side of it, they are literally overwhelming our capacity to finance these projects. And so we're looking at things like P3 to help us, but P3, public-private partnerships, that doesn't create funds. It creates equity that needs to be paid back over time. And so for us, bringing the private side into the development of these projects is, in my opinion, is all about reducing the risk to the private side and increasing the capacity for benefit to the private side. And so really what we focus on, and I think the industry is moving us this way anyway. I mean, I think that the certainly on the capital side, perhaps the O&M side as well, but in development of these projects, the private side, the industry is moving away from risk that these projects present, and moving more towards a balanced approach. And so the agencies, and certainly I know that LA Metro, we're looking very hard at trying to bring the private side into the fold, if you will, by trying to do things that balance the risk. So, certainly from a development standpoint, one way to do that is to work with the agencies or the public entities. And, certainly in LA County, there's 88 cities. I have projects that go through 13 or 14 different jurisdictions. And so to try to open up a development opportunity for the private side through 13 or 14 different jurisdictions means 13 or 14 different sets of criteria that the private side would have to deal with, in order to invest or obtain some equity in the project. So, what we are looking at is an ability to work with the agencies to mitigate some of those risks. So for instance, all of the permitting process. So if we're working with 14 different community agencies, we've got to sort of straight line the permitting requirements, and so and crossings that go through these communities. How do we encourage the private side to look at developments that are in or next to stations? And it is our goal to make this all happen, but to work with the agencies to help bring the development requirements into a something that's manageable or predictable. And I think that reduces the risk for the private side, and gives them some encouragement to invest some equity into these projects.
I'd really like to have another hour at this one, because this whole issue of private sector engagement and incentives and risk and is a topic that's in the context of this topic. Transit hubs is something that's really interesting. We've only got a few minutes more, and I'm going to give those last minutes to Meghan, because I want Meghan, could you speak a bit about what the Ontario government has done in order to address the bottlenecks in transit development, to legislation that it's passed to address those kinds of concerns?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I almost made it without speaking to the new legislation. We buried the lead, but the provincial government has recently passed a new legislation called the Building Transit Faster Act. And it's intended to do exactly solve for some of the things we've been talking about today, streamlining permitting processes, letting the transit agency have more control over the delivery of new projects. I spoke earlier about a pretty significant amount of transit expansion. So this comes at a really pivotal time for us, assisting with sort of the property acquisition pieces and really just enabling those projects to move quicker. We've been talking about really long timeframes today, but that doesn't mean we don't have a lagging demand that needs transit as quickly as possible. I think in Toronto, my personal opinion is that we're a little bit behind, and we're doing both a catch up and a look forward. And so really excited about this new legislation and the doors it's opening for us to build projects quicker.
So I think we'll wrap it up there. We barely touched the surface of this topic, but I would like to thank each of you, Meghan, Ian, and Rick, for for participating in your comments. Thanks, everybody.
Pleasure.
Thank
It
you
was a
so much.
pleasure.